We should have supported Hitler in World War II. What the hell is wrong with you? What has happened to Tucker Carlson, this descent of Tucker Carlson into a moral and intellectual abyss? It began with COVID. And it has led him to now come to the conclusion that you must question everything. Remember that phrase, question everything. He's become fundamentally anti-American. And he's tilting towards anti-Semitism. He's embracing the leftist narrative that America and her allies are the global villain from World War II on. So what is going on? Well, as I see it, there are three possibilities. The first is that it's Welcome to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton, and today I want to talk about Tucker Carlson's descent into a moral and intellectual cesspool. His descent into a place where, for him anyway, the world is a house of mirrors and nothing is as it seems. Now, I want to do this not to pick on Carlson, but as a case study in, well, how ideas, in this case specifically bad ideas, have consequences, very serious consequences. This is something that is very practical for you today in how to think and, well, how not to think. Now, last week, things blew up on social media once again as Carlson hosted yet another Nazi apologist. This time it was a guy named David Collum. And David, I invite you to come on the show. Should you watch this, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you specifically about the things that you expressed regarding World War II on Tucker Carlson's show. But here, if you missed it, here is what Collum said.
And it started when I read a book by Diana West, who would be good if you interviewed her. And it's this all revisionist history of World War II. And you go, well, why would you want to read that? Well, it turns out I think the story we got about World War II is all wrong, actually.
I think that's right.
And then I read about FDR, and FDR's right-hand man was a Soviet spy.
Certainly was.
Right? And therefore...
Confirmed.
We should have been... One can make the argument we should have sided with Hitler and fought Stalin. Patton said that. So, and maybe there wouldn't have been a Holocaust, right? You know, but Stalin was awful by any metric, and we weren't his ally.
To quote, one can make the argument that we should have sided with Hitler. Yes, David, one can make that argument. Nazis make that argument. Unhinged people make that argument. Now, Collum isn't a historian. Why he's on Tucker Carlson's show talking about this, I have no idea. But this has become a pattern with Tucker Carlson hosting people who have these kinds of unhinged views. Collum is a chemistry professor at Cornell University. And he's read, egads, he seems to have read a few. I mean, he says, I've read some books, which I guess apparently makes him history books, which apparently makes him an authority on World War II. And now he's an expert. So he's telling the rest of us that, you know what, the narrative, he goes on to say, that we have been given on World War II is wrong. Now, that would be like me going on Tucker Carlson's show and saying, you know what, the narrative that we've received on chemistry is all wrong, and Carlson just lapping all that kind of stuff up. Collum isn't qualified to make these kinds of statements.
I thought Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War. Now, he didn't kill the most people. He didn't commit the most atrocities, but I believe, and I think when you really get into it and tell the story right and don't leave anything out, you see that he was primarily responsible for that war becoming what it did, becoming something other than an invasion of Poland.
It's not like Hitler was going and giving big speeches at City Square in Berlin, going on and on and on about how we're going to kill the Jews. And the German people said, right on, like, let's go do it. That was...
just to take it back to the first thing I said, and I'll shut up and let you answer, but if Churchill is a hero, how come there are British girls begging for drugs on the street of London?
Now, Cooper, as we have noted on a previous episode of Ideas Have Consequences, is a Nazi apologist who self-identifies as, quote, a non-racist fascist, whatever that is. I mean, fascism is, by definition, a belief that history is defined by a race war. It's a war of the blood. So where communism, where Marxism, where socialism views history as an economic war, fascists view it, no, it's a war of races. It's a war of races. So exactly how you could be a non-racist fascist when fascism is by definition racist. I mean, it's like saying that you're a non-anti-Semite Muslim. Islam is by definition anti-Semitic. I mean, try reading the Quran, read the Hadith, read the life of Muhammad. I mean, it's defined that way. You can't be that. You simply can't be that. It's an oxymoron. But anyway, Cooper, like Collum, he sees the accepted narrative of World War II as backward, as false, that the people we believed were the good guys aren't the good guys, and the people we believed are the bad guys are not the bad guys. Now, again, I'll state that is an unhinged view. But anyway, this is the kind of thing that we're now seeing that Tucker Carlson is platforming on a regular basis. The Steve Deace Show, reached out to me and asked me if I would be willing to debate Daryl Cooper. I said, with relish, I would be delighted to do that. Unsurprisingly, Cooper ran for cover and said he didn't want any part of that. So he would not agree to debate me on this particular issue. Now, coming back to Tucker Carlson, the first time, some of you have said to me, and I think rightly, that I was wrong in saying that Tucker Carlson was naive. I wanted to defend Carlson because I have, until quite recently, liked Tucker Carlson. I view Tucker Carlson as an authentic conservative. But over the course of the last couple of years, at least, Tucker Carlson has been saying first things that were somewhat questionable. And I thought, you know what? Let's give him the benefit of the doubt here. He maybe is just naive in doing this. Maybe in platforming a guy like Daryl Cooper the first time, he didn't know better. But then he platformed him again. He platformed him again after everyone pointed out to him, hey, Tucker, you may not be aware, but this guy, he isn't A, a real historian, and B, he's wrong. I mean, he's wrong. I mean, monumentally wrong on so many of the assertions that the guy makes. And again, there are going to be some of you are going to come out and try to dump on me in the YouTube comments and say, oh, you're just making assertions here without facts. I did a whole show on Cooper. You can go and watch that. I point out systematically just some of the things. I mean, listen, trying to address all the issues where Cooper is wrong is a monumental task that I just simply don't have the time for it. I mean, you listen to or read some of the things the guy says, I feel like a mosquito on a nudist beach. I mean, you just don't know where to begin. So you just have to choose a few choice morsels, and go after it. There's just no where are you going to go with all this? But again, the first time Carlson platformed Daryl Cooper, I thought he's just being naive. And again, some of you said to me, no, Larry, he's not being naive. You were right. He's not being naive because he platformed him again. And now he's platformed this guy, David Collum, who might be a brilliant chemist. I don't know. Maybe he's a Nobel Prize winner. Maybe he's changed chemistry as we understand it, but he's an idiot historian. He's an idiot historian. He's an amateur who has no idea what he's talking about. This has become a pattern with Tucker Carlson, and it's become impossible to defend him. Once is happenstance. Twice is coincidence. 3 times, as they say, well, that is a pattern, and this has become a pattern with Tucker Carlson. Here's a montage of Carlson clips put together my Milk Bar TV. And if I have attributed this wrongly to Milk Bar TV, I've just seen this on social media, and I saw it on this particular account. So I believe they're the ones who deserve credit for this. Thank you so much for this montage, because it's terrific. But it shows the devolution of Tucker Carlson, his descent, as I say, into a moral and intellectual abyss. Here he is talking about, he's moving on Sharia law.
It's a large number of Muslims around the world who are sympathetic to these acts of craziness. Pew Research poll findings that 1 of every 4 Muslim Americans younger than 30 believe suicide bombing in the defense of Islam is justifiable. For instance, do you believe that Arabs carried out the 9/11 attacks? Only 40% believe Arabs carried them out. Do they think the Jews did it? I get that decent Muslim Americans feel under attack. They feel like they're being unfairly portrayed as terrorists. I understand all that. But at some point, you have to say, this really is a real problem, and it's discrediting all of us, and until we take it seriously, it's going to continue, no? We can debate the details here, but I think it's important to acknowledge a baseline, and that is that there have been an awful lot of attacks where actual people died in the United States and in Europe, committed by people saying really clearly we're acting in the name of Islam. Hasidic Jews, I mean, they're a set-apart community, speak a different language, not assimilated, but I don't see a lot of terror attacks committed by those groups. Often hear Americans say, I have said, including last night, is that assimilation is the problem, is people are not assimilated. And yet you look around, and there are actually a number of groups in our society and yours who aren't assimilated. Hasidic Jews live apart, the Amish live apart. They pose no threat at all to the country they live in. They love the country. Why is this group different? Well, the Muslim population of the West is rising very quickly, and that has implications for social cohesion or national security. So if I say, as Islamic countries do, you don't have a choice. You have to wear the hijab. You need to be modest, and if you're not, you could get raped, and if you do, it's your fault. And you have to avert your gaze from men. For example, women are asked to walk behind their husbands, or in some countries you're not allowed to drive or vote. Under certain circumstances, can that be empowering? Can female genital mutilation be empowering? That's common in Islamic countries. An Austrian woman was convicted of, quote, disparaging religion. She was fined more than $500. Her crime was suggesting that Muhammad's marriage to a 6-year-old constituted a form of pedophilia. She claimed her comments were protected by the freedom of speech because she is a European, and traditionally they would have been, but things have changed now. So in other words, a standard that has long prevailed in the Islamic world, which is that you can be punished for criticizing Muhammad, is now the law in Europe.
Exactly right.
The bomber was born in Britain, not some far-off land, but he still grew up to embrace Islamic radicalism and declare war on the country that raised him and kill his neighbors, in effect. There are many more like him. So when you watch the American response, even the cultural response to an event like what happened in your country on Monday, are you surprised by how few of the lessons Americans are learning from this?
Sharia law is bad, Seth. I don't know if you've heard that. It's bad. It's worse than what's happening in New York and Detroit. It's just bad.
It's Tucker Carlson at the Real Estate Future Forum 2025.
Never been to Saudi Arabia, and I can't wait to go for a glimpse of what the future holds, because that's what you see when you go to the Gulf.
Because of its scale, its significance in Islam.
He's like, you know what Islam means? Submission. And like, let it hang in the air. Like that was self-evidently disgusting. And I was like, I kind of think submission to God is like the whole point of life, but I didn't say anything. I was like, I don't think I'm against that, actually.
This is an existential threat to the Western way of life. I really believe that.
Anyone who submits to God, like, I'm just for that.
In uncertain times, wise investors look for stability. Markets are overinflated. Inflation remains a concern, and global tensions continue to rise. That's why many are turning to the safety of physical gold and silver. AlphaOmega Gold is a Christian-owned precious metals company known for honesty, transparency, and biblical stewardship principles. Their team help clients protect their investment with integrity and clear guidance, never pressure. Right now, AlphaOmega Gold is offering a free precious metals navigation guide to explain why owning gold and silver can be a smart, strategic hedge for retirement accounts and long-term security. Don't wait until economic shifts impact your future. Visit alphaomegagold.com or call 855-4AO-GOLD. That's 855-426-4653. Call today to learn how simple it can be to secure what matters most. Now, I keep saying to you a moral abyss. It may be obvious to you why this is an intellectual abyss, because it's, again, sort of saying nothing is real. Nothing can be true. The whole world is just smoke and mirrors. There's nothing we can assume to be factual, anymore. But it's a moral abyss because these are not morally neutral issues. Addressing the Holocaust is not a morally neutral issue. Addressing who the good guys and bad guys were in World War II is not a morally neutral issue. And by the way, Tucker, I think it's damnable. I think it's absolutely damnable that you would crap on all of the veterans who lost their lives fighting a war against tyranny. Were they perfect? No. Were there atrocities that occurred that the Allies committed? For sure. Were there some bad guys in our midst? Absolutely. But on the whole, if any war that America ever fought was a just war, it is World War II. It is World War II. And it's pretty obvious that Hitler was the bad guy. It's pretty obvious that Churchill wasn't. And for you to take the position that you're just kind of asking questions, it's cowardly. And it's morally reprehensible in my view, because those veterans are almost all gone. And those that remain probably aren't in a position really to defend themselves against your attack. And it is an attack. Now, what has happened to Tucker Carlson, that Tucker Carlson has gone from being a very trustworthy, you can find episodes of Ideas Have Consequences where I have said to people, at least I think you can, where I've said to people, hey, that's a trustworthy news source. I now say to people, look at the Federalist, look at Molly Hemingway, look at Sean Davis, who we've had on this show. Those are solid people that you can rely on. That's a terrific news source. There are others. But I used to say to people, Tucker Carlson, he's somebody you can rely on. And now Carlson, what in the hell is going on with Tucker Carlson? So what happened to him? How did we get here? How did we come to a place where Carlson has embraced the leftist narrative? Now, he may be embracing the leftist narrative unwittingly. Some of you will say, Larry, you're giving him the benefit of the doubt of being naive again. But I don't think Tucker Carlson sees himself as a leftist. But this is a leftist narrative. It's an anti-American narrative. It's absolutely what the left loves, what he's doing here. But he's embracing the leftist narrative that America and her allies are the global villain from World War II on. So what is going on? Well, as I see it, there are three possibilities. There are three possibilities. The first is that it's just about clicks. Some of you will say that you think it's just about clicks. You could be right. I don't know. I mean, Tucker Carlson is getting oxygen on this show. He's getting oxygen all over social media by delving into controversial issues and coming up with controversial hot takes. That the moon landing isn't real, and he's going at absolutely every controversial topic that he can. The Shroud of Turin, let's see what else, JFK assassination, aliens, all these kinds of things are the things that he's doing on his show. Things that I don't think are particularly helpful for people, because in some cases you simply can't know them, and in others, the information that he's putting out feels like it's designed to undermine traditional interpretations, which I'm okay with if you've got facts. You got to bring the facts. And to undermine people's worldview, their understanding of the world, to leave them a little shaken. Now, if you're just about clicks, this is a good way to do it, coming up with just controversial hot takes. Now, I'm a football fan. I'm a college football fan. And let me give you an example of the sort of thing that I'm talking about. Former University of Alabama quarterback, suddenly his name is gone, Greg McElroy, very recently made a lot of news by saying that longtime, famed, legendary coach Nick Saban was going to come out of retirement and go back into coaching. That got media attention everywhere in the sports world. If you follow college football, now if you don't, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you do, that hot take got loads of attention. It raised Greg McElroy's visibility. No doubt probably garnered him more followers on social media. It got him numerous interviews. He was being talked about the same way that we're talking about Tucker Carlson. This is the way social media works. Well, just a few days ago, Nick Saban was giving a speech in Birmingham, Alabama, where he was asked about this. And he said, Greg used to be, I'm paraphrasing, Greg used to be a quarterback for us, and if he had ever said anything like this when he was quarterback for our team, I would have kicked his ass. I mean, that's a direct quote, that last part. He said, I would have kicked his ass, meaning he's saying it was complete nonsense. I never said that. I certainly never said it to Greg McElroy. So then why did Greg McElroy do it? To get the clicks. Yesterday I was sitting in a coffee shop. I was completely anonymous among a group of people. But you know how some of these coffee shops, and I like this, they create kind of like living room sort of stuff. I mean, some of them have tables all over the place, but this is one of those coffee shops where it's like you have several little living room sitting areas. So I was sitting in a chair, and a young woman was sitting on a couch, and another guy is sitting on a chair. We're all facing each other. None of us know each other. But then another guy who's much like my producer over here, Jonathan, he comes over and he says to the young woman who's sitting on the couch, hey, I understand that you're in university now, and that you're wanting to become, I don't know exactly what the term is, but basically a producer for influencers. And so they start talking about this. Then the guy who's sitting in the chair, who doesn't know either of them, says, excuse me, I'm an influencer. What do you guys do? And he says, and the guy who initially came over and started the conversation, he said, well, I produce several shows for a lot of influencers. And this guy is asking, then the two of them begin engaging in conversation. And the guy who is an influencer, I hope this is not becoming confusing, says, what advice do you have for me? And he says, well, you have to make a determination. Do you want to do what you like and put out content that you like and believe in, or do you just want the clicks? And he says, well, what if it's the latter? And he says, well, then you got to come up with hot takes and put out stuff that's controversial. And at that point, I entered the conversation because I thought, this is now starting to irritate me. And I said, that's not what you want to do, because that means you're disingenuous. It means you're a fraud. Means you're just about the clicks, you're just about the money. For those of you, sometimes people come into the YouTube comments and say that that's all that I'm about. You're an idiot who does not understand this world if you think that that's what I'm about. The way social media works, I promise you, the people who produce this show in Dallas are not thrilled with with my particular approach, because the way that you do shows like this is that you kiss the asses of people above you in social media so that they'll host you on their shows, so that they'll retweet your show, so they'll tell other people to watch your show. I promise you, me attacking Tucker Carlson does me no good. Me attacking Jordan Peterson does no good. It doesn't help me at all to do that. Me attacking Candace Owens does me no good, because they have much larger platforms, and, they criticize me and be heard a lot more than me criticizing them. Furthermore, it kills any possibility of me getting on their shows and having the opportunity to be heard by much larger audiences. Many of you have pointed out that YouTube is suppressing this show. Of course it is. But the reason I do that is not because I'm looking for clickbait. The reason I'm doing it is because I feel I have a moral responsibility to you to warn you of those people who would lead you astray. And it doesn't mean that everything all the aforementioned people say is wrong. It just means that there are things that are occasionally being said that I find dangerous. And I think what Tucker Carlson is doing here is dangerous. So it doesn't help me to criticize people like this at all, because it ensures that maybe I have enemies who have a more powerful platform than my own, and certainly it means they're not going to do anything to help me along. But if one of the problems as I see it, and here I'll make another enemy right here, one of the problems that I see with, say, a network like Daily Wire. And by the way, I've done some work for Daily Wire. I like Daily Wire. Daily Wire is also, generally speaking, a good news source. However, it's problematic in my view when you are criticizing people on the left who are doing things that sometimes people in your own network are doing and you say nothing. For the sake of our integrity, I think we have to be consistent. And if I'm going to criticize, say, Biden for doing something and not criticize Trump if and when he does it, and I'm just making up a scenario here, then I'm as bad as they are. I'm as bad as they are. And I don't want to do that. And too often, I see people who say nothing about colleagues in their network who are going way off of the rails, but will go after somebody on the left or on another network who's doing exactly the same thing. It's why, by the way, I've tried very hard to maintain my independence. On this show, any contract I have with anybody, it states that I'm free to choose what I want to talk about and say what I want to say. I won't be censored. I won't be edited in that way. Maintaining independence is hard. It's very hard, certainly not as much money in it. But I feel better about myself doing it that way. Coming back to Tucker Carlson, is he just about clicks? I don't think so, because that would mean that Tucker Carlson is a fraud, that he's an intellectual fraud, and that he's disingenuous with all the things that he's saying. I don't believe that about Tucker Carlson. I think he believes the nonsense that he's spouting. Hence the reason he keeps going back to the same well with the same people. It's not like he's all over the map. He's going after specific issues, specific things. And the specific bottom line issue that he's going for is that America's the bad guy. He's become fundamentally anti-American, and he's tilting towards anti-Semitism. He's tilting towards anti-Semitism. So what's the other possibility that's going on here? If it isn't clicks, what is it? Well, there is a type of person on any given issue who will reject facts and believe that which is false because they think it makes them look smart. That by being contrarian, they position themselves as the only people in the room who really know what's going on. That's Daryl Cooper. I mean, we have all these, extraordinary, historians who have spent years, decades of their lives studying the Second World War. But here comes Daryl Cooper working out of his garage, and guess what? They're all wrong. All of them. He's the guy who's figured out what's going on. I mean, if we'd have just consulted him, we would know what's going on. That's Daryl Cooper. That's Candace Owens. Candace Owens also positions herself as the one person in the room who really knows what's going on. That's not Tucker Carlson. I don't believe that's him. On the contrary, Carlson's charm for years has been his common sense approach to the news. He said what you already knew to be true, and you appreciated him for saying it and for arranging it in a way that helped you make sense of the world. That was Tucker Carlson's strength. That's not where Tucker Carlson is now, but that was his approach for years, from CNN over to Fox. And I would say maybe initially with his podcast. So, if it's not just for clickbait, I'm not going to say the clicks don't matter to Carlson, but I don't think that's his driving force. If it's not because he's just being a contrarian, just to be a contrarian, there's some people who are like that, then what is it? Well, there are those who, after COVID and lockdowns and the discovery that the Biden administration, along with several other Western governments and non-Western ones, say like China, were conspiring to defraud their citizens, the American people, there are some people that discovery, that government was pushing a false narrative, that they came to the conclusion that nothing is real, nothing is true. Their entire worldviews were uprooted. They adopted the question everything mantra and became unhinged. That's Tucker Carlson. You see, this descent of Tucker Carlson into a moral and intellectual abyss, a cesspool, a house of mirrors, began with COVID. It began with COVID. And it has led him to now come to the conclusion that you must question everything. Remember that phrase, question everything. And this really gets at the heart of what we're talking about today and why this matters and why it should matter to you. And pay attention to what I have to say here, because this should be something that's a very practical use to you, intellectually speaking, morally speaking, and the way you navigate the world. This is Tucker Carlson. There were a number of other people who, once he started doing this, and Candace Owens was already there, I think Candace Owens actually has had quite a negative impact on Tucker Carlson. I don't think it's Carlson influencing her. I think it's her influencing him. But I speculate on that particular point. But there are others who kind of kissing Tucker Carlson's behind because, again, just as I said to you, that's the way this world works. That's the way the social media, the podcast world works, is you kiss the behinds of those above you in the hope that they'll acknowledge you and appreciate you and have you on their shows. Jason Whitlock tweeted this: "We're living in a time where everything needs to be questioned. Many of the things we've been told were lies. A lot of people in America are waking up. It's why Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, and Candace Owens are having so much success." Now, on the surface of it, this seems harmless enough. But this isn't a harmless tweet. It isn't a morally neutral tweet. Whitlock wasn't posting this in reference to, say, the Russian collusion narrative, which we know to be false, or the claim that Ukraine is a bastion of freedom and democracy, which is also false. But it's one that's been pushed, again, by government. Or governments. It's been pushed by pretty much every Western government up to, but no longer including our government since Trump was inaugurated. Whitlock posted this in support of people like Tucker Carlson who are platforming Nazis under the Question Everything banner. Now, I want to be clear. I have no problem with a given show hosting, platforming crackpots. None whatsoever. I'm a Christian, and I've platformed loads of atheists who were spouting things that I thought were nonsense. I have platformed them at Princeton University. I've platformed them at Oxford University. I've platformed them at a packed-out town hall in Melbourne, Australia, at WashU. I've platformed them all over the place. And there were a lot of Christians who said to me, "Larry, why are you doing this? As a Christian, why would you assist atheists in getting their arguments out?" Because I was doing it in debate form. I was doing it in debate form, meaning I wasn't just simply, putting Richard Dawkins up on stage to say whatever he wanted, and then when he's done, we all applaud, and then he leaves. I was doing it so that there would then be the opportunity for a Christian rebuttal. I was doing it because I wanted an audience to see there are logical responses to the issues that they're raising, to the accusations that they're making. I was doing it to give instruction to a very large audience. I mean, if you look on my channel, some of our debates have well over 1 million views. Some of them, north of 2 or 3 million views, I think. I haven't looked at it in quite a while, but the point is a lot of people are watching them. And what they're seeing is they're seeing the atheistic worldview being challenged by biblical Christianity. That's why I did it. I'm not in favor of just platforming crackpots who just would come on this show and say whatever they like. I would be happy to have David Collum on this show. I'd be happy to have Daryl Cooper on this show. But be aware, I'm coming after you. I'm coming after you because I feel that I have a moral responsibility to my audience to point out where your views are not only illogical, but historically false and damnable. We should have supported Hitler in World War II. What the hell is wrong with you? But you say something like that, and then he goes on and says, and maybe the Holocaust wouldn't have happened, as if the Holocaust were just sort of a trivial issue that, one way or the other doesn't really matter, but maybe it wouldn't have happened. Professor Collum, I've read Mein Kampf. Have you? I've been away for some time. And what I was doing is going to figure into future episodes of Ideas Have Consequences. I need time to think about it. But I'll reveal this much. Last week, I was at Sachsenhausen concentration camp, which is just north of Berlin. Professor Collum, the Holocaust happened. It was real. In addition to Sachsenhausen, I've been to Mauthausen, I've been to Auschwitz multiple times, Buchenwald, Dachau, Mittelbau-Dora. I've seen these places. In 2001, I believe it was, I received a fellowship to go to Germany and study the intellectual origins of the Holocaust. It's a fact. And it's more than just a minor trivial issue. And if you think that Adolf Hitler might not have done it, if we'd have been on his side in the Second World War, there's no connection between those two. None whatsoever. The Holocaust, the very first concentration camp opened in 1933. Hitler was persecuting Jews before that. Anti-Semitism, the annihilation of European Jewry, wasn't incidental to his political platform. It was central. So your comments are morally reprehensible. Now, some people will say, and I'm just going to throw this in, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole just very briefly. Why is it we hear about that and not about all of the Bolshevik crimes? Well, have you received a proper education? You know something of Stalinism. I mean, what was the, 1965 picture of the year? Dr. Zhivago. I mean, these stories have been told in the West. If you've read Boris Pasternak or Alexander Solzhenitsyn or Varlam Shalamov or and numerous others who are talking about these things. I mean, the whole Cold War was about the evils of communism, about the roughly, according to Robert Conquest of Stanford Institute, 30 million killed by Stalin. But see, here again is the logical fallacy that these people fall into. They see Stalin as worse than Hitler, in part because they just don't care about the annihilation of Jews. And by the way, it wasn't just the annihilation of Jews. World War II saw roughly 55 million people killed globally. How many Americans? 300,000, roughly? All because of Adolf Hitler. And what was going on in another form of fascism in the Pacific, in Japan. Imperial Japan. So these things, they matter. But then they see the body count of Stalin is higher. As I said, Robert Conquest puts the number at about 30 million. Alexander Solzhenitsyn puts the number at about 60 million. But either of those figures are much higher than Hitler's body count. So they go, aha, Stalin was worse. We should have been on Hitler's side. Do understand that Adolf Hitler was in power for a mere 12 and a half years. If you think he wouldn't have killed as many people as Stalin did, Stalin died in March 1953, I promise you he would have. He just didn't live long enough to do it. He had every plan of doing it if you read Mein Kampf, and I have. So you don't go from going, well, his body count was higher and we should have been on this guy's side. No, we're opposed to both. I hate both. And if you're wondering why we were on the Soviet side in World War II, it's because Hitler invaded Russia June 22nd, 1941, 175 divisions, 4.5 million men crossed the Russian frontier in what was known as Operation Barbarossa. And because we're at war, or we would eventually be at war, but there were already Western allies that the U.S. hadn't joined. We're already at war. You better believe they wanted the Russians fighting the Germans, because Germany was an immediate threat to Western Europe, not Stalin. Just look at a map. Look at where Germany sits on a map. They had invaded France. They'd invaded the Low Countries. They had absorbed Austria in the Anschluss. They had absorbed part of Poland. They had absorbed Czechoslovakia. So why were they so focused on Hitler? Because he was the immediate threat. And if Stalin was killing Germans, so much the better. We will worry about him post-war. Do not fall into the logical trap that by rejecting one thing means you accept the other. I see people sometimes do this on vaccines. I just said to you that I have no problem with hosting crackpots on a show, but you need to be prepared. I feel like I need to be prepared to be educated enough on whatever the issue is that I can point out to you, the audience, where my guest is wrong. Now, I've never addressed vaccines. I don't have a single episode on vaccines. And the reason I don't is because I do not feel like I'm qualified to do that. And if I were to have on my show someone who, was presented as an expert on vaccines, I would not be equipped to know if he's lying or not. So he could come on my show and just pull a Daryl Cooper and just say anything where old Tucker Carlson sits and nods because he didn't know any better. I don't want to be guilty of that. So I don't have people on my show who are experts in things where I have zero expertise or at least a working knowledge. But coming back to what I was just saying about vaccines, there are those people who, and again, I'm not making a statement here because I don't know. I really don't know. But there are those people who I have found quite convincing. Last May, I was in Geneva at a health conference discussing vaccines, discussing the World Health Organization and the threat that it poses to the sovereignty of nations. And I heard some very convincing arguments laid out by some very learned people that certain vaccines are dangerous. But I also think it's dangerous to immediately jump to the conclusion that that means all of them, every single one. You see the problem that in rejecting one thing that you embrace its opposite. Be careful of that. Take issues one at a time. Consider them one at a time. Because I'm anti-fascist doesn't mean I'm pro-communist. And by the way, they aren't opposites. They are bastard twins of the same ideology. There's just some slight deviation. Both of them are leftist ideologies. Both of them are totalitarian. It was a post-World War II narrative, and I'm going to come back to this in a later episode of Ideas Have Consequences, that marketed communism as the ideological opposite of fascism. And it led a lot of people to embrace it because they believed it to be true. To say you were a communist meant you were anti-fascist. It really doesn't mean that. But very cleverly, it was marketed that way because the two are at war with each other. But they're at war with each other the way brothers might go to war with each other. Anyway, these kinds of tweets like this are not morally neutral. These are the kinds of things. The question everything mantra is a dangerous mantra because it's nihilism. Everything, you question everything. A child might question the wisdom of having his teeth brushed, but I expect more from my dentist. I expect him to know a little bit more than that. I remember questioning the wisdom to a physician of mine whether or not it was important that I have a particular procedure. And I'll never forget her response to demolish my ignorance on the subject and say to me, no, this is extremely important. But it's easy for me to think, I don't know anything about it. I don't know. This probably doesn't matter. You see? The question everything mantra is very, very dangerous, as you'll see. Now, many people jumped to Whitlock's defense when I said to Jason, question everything, Jason? Like your mother's love? God's love? Your purpose in this life? Your meaning? Everything? And a lot of people jumped to his defense and said, yes, everything, Larry. For me, it was not a particularly shocking discovery to find that governments often lie to their citizens in order to preserve power. But for others, it led them to, and Tucker Carlson at the top of this list, it led them to uproot their entire worldview, where suddenly there was nothing that could be counted on as being true anymore. That's infantile. But I think for sensible people, it just meant a modest recalibration. Fool me once, shame on you. Government, fool me twice, shame on me. You see, it seems to me that by the time you're a grown-ass man, you ought to have resolved a few of life's questions. How is it that you could possibly get this far, Jason, and still question everything? I think you went to university. Have you not settled a few things? Are there not a few things that you feel like you know with certainty to be true? And by the way, the Holocaust and who the good guys and the bad guys were in World War II are just two of them. God's existence is something you ought to have resolved by this time. I don't question that. Right and wrong, I don't question that. I feel very confident about what is right and what is wrong in most situations. There are morally ambiguous situations, things that require us to consider a little bit more. My meaning and purpose, I don't question. I know it. I know my mission in life. I don't question my wife's love. I don't question my mother's love. I don't question the love of my children. I don't question my love for them. And I don't question what I stand for. So no, I don't question everything. By the time you are a grown-ass man, you should be beyond the infantile, the intellectually infantile, question everything stage of development. You should be beyond that. But if that's where you are, Jason, and that's where you are, Candace, and that's where you are, Tucker, you need to retire and go to your Walden Pond until you figure life out. Because you aren't fit for a public platform. Because you have no answers for people. How can I sit down here on a weekly basis and offer any kind of meaningful commentary to people if I'm still at a place where I don't believe anything can be known as true? One well-intentioned person said this to me, Larry, you yourself question everything so much that you recently risked your life in search of answers. That's wrong. If I was so unstable as to question everything, and it is, by the way, intellectually, morally unstable, I would risk nothing, certainly not my life. On the contrary, I take risks because I know with absolute clarity God's call upon my life. And because I know what is right and what is wrong, and I know what I'm meant to do. And in those instances that you're referring to, it's where I'm seeking facts and to bring down an organization like USAID because I knew that they were a corrupt organization engaging in global human trafficking. It's because I knew it. And I was just seeking more confirmation of what they were doing. It wasn't because I was willy-nilly questioning absolutely everything. No, it's because I knew my mission. And because I knew my mission, I was willing to take risks right up to the point of my own life. I'm sure I will at some point in the future. And as I was sitting in the car in Cairo at USAID, Had something happen to me, I had absolutely certainty that I was in God's hands. If I lose my life this day, I know that I'm where I'm supposed to be. If I live, I know I was where I was supposed to be. I wasn't questioning everything. Again, that's unstable, not just intellectually, it's morally unstable. And by the time you're an adult, children are at a place where they're questioning lots of things because they don't know the facts. Why shouldn't I go and play in the road? Why shouldn't I take a key and put it into a light socket? I did that once. When I remember my mother telling me not to do that. I was playing with her keys on the floor, and I was just, I think maybe 3 in Seattle. And I thought it fits perfectly. I didn't question that anymore. Mark that one off the question everything list. Now we're down to question some things, but electricity we don't question. No, I don't question everything. And some people seem to think that what I'm saying is that we should just accept what we're being told. No, I don't believe that either. I think you research things. I think you become educated. I think you test things. You have tentative hypotheses, and you arrive at answers for many things. And then there are other things where maybe you are still questioning. You still don't know. I just admitted I don't know. I'm undecided about vaccines, I shouldn't say in the broad sense, because there are a lot of vaccines that I feel very confident are very good vaccines. Polio, for instance. Very good vaccines. But, as I've said, a lot of questions were raised for me in Geneva last year where I went with an open mind to hear people who were questioning a lot about more recent vaccines. I don't know the answers there because I'm not an expert, but I'm questioning some things there. That's okay. That's okay. I'm simply saying here that if you've managed to make it to adulthood without arriving at some answers to the above questions, to some of life's fundamental questions, then you're unstable and you're definitely not fit to have your own show. You're not fit to teach anywhere, not in Sunday school, not in vacation Bible school. You don't need to be a news anchor. You don't need to be in a high school teaching anyone because you have zero to offer because apparently you're still questioning everything. And by the way, this is what I'm saying to you is rooted in Scripture. People like this are morally and intellectually adrift because they are, in the words of 2 Timothy 3:7, always learning and never able to arrive at a knowledge of the truth. I like the way the Apostle Paul puts it there. He's speaking of unstable people, and he says they're the people who are always learning and never able to arrive at a knowledge of the truth. They just kind of keep going. Can't ever settle on an answer. Before I took my oral examinations for my graduate degree in history, I could think of, because the way these work is, at least mine, I was to have competency, some measure of expertise in 5 historical fields. And there are 5 professors who question you for 2.5, 3 hours, maybe more. And you're responsible for loads of books and loads of theories and loads of ideas and loads of individuals. And you get to schedule the date of your oral examination. And I kept, as I was preparing, I had books stacked all over the place. I could think of a million questions I could be asked that I didn't know the answer to. And that frightened me because I thought, I'm going to fail my oral examinations. So I would postpone my oral examinations and go back to the library for another month to study. Then I would think of more things that I didn't know, and I would postpone it again. And about the time I was about to postpone my oral examinations for, I think, the 3rd time, my advisor, my professor of Russian history said, Larry, you know these fields. You know these topics. Will they ask you questions you don't know the answers to? Of course. And you just say, I don't know. Because they will know. They're not going to ask you questions that they don't know the answers to. So you can't just BS your way through it. But they don't expect you to know absolutely everything. What they're looking for here is competency in these 5 fields. And you are more than competent in these 5 fields. You can do it. So nervously, I went along and said, okay, I'll take the oral examination. And I enjoyed it. I had fun. For 3 hours, they hammered away. And for 3 hours, I was shooting back answers as best I could and came away in flying colors and received my degree. But let us suppose they had asked me about the Holocaust or about the horrors of Stalinism, the great purges, or they had asked me about Mao's cultural revolution that killed millions. And I had said, I'm still questioning everything. You know what they would have done or should have done? They would have denied me my degree because they would have said, this means you're a bad historian. It also means you're immoral. Because if you cannot look at the available evidence on these historical tragedies and arrive at a right, not just simply historical answer, but a moral answer regarding these things, you are not fit to teach history, much less write about it and discuss it. You're not. They would have rightly concluded that I was unhinged. Now, are there things that we don't know regarding these issues? Of course. You can't know everything about it, but there's mountains of evidence for everything that I just mentioned to you. And the evidence overwhelmingly supports the conclusion that they were all evil. There's no bit of evidence that's going to be uncovered to say otherwise. Question everything. Question everything is a position that is unhinged. Do not follow the question everything crowd. They'll lead you right off an intellectual and moral cliff. Scripture also tells us this. Apostle Paul again, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. Questioning everything is a childish way. It's a childish way. Grow up. Grow up intellectually. James 1:5-8 says this, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, without doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways. It's not the path that you want to take. I'm reminded of an exchange. The whole question everything mantra reminded me of a story of the legendary 19th century Oxford classicist Benjamin Jowett when speaking to a theology student. And the theology student said to him, I cannot see any sign of God in nature. And when I look for him in my own heart, I fail to find him there. Jowett said to him without any irony, he said, well, you better find him by tomorrow or leave the university. The point is, Jowett was saying to him, you're a student of theology here at Oxford University and you haven't even settled the question of God's existence? What are you doing here? You don't belong here. I mean, really, that's where it leads you. You know, coming back to Jason Whitlock, when a woman, a member of the posse, a woman who watches this show regularly, questioned the wisdom of what Jason Whitlock was saying, he attacked her. I came to her defense, and I said this, and I quote, however she might have expressed it, Gen 80 is correct. I strongly encourage you to consult actual historians, but before believing anything Cooper says. I say this both as a historian and as a brother of Christ. Do you know what Jason Whitlock did? He immediately unfollowed me. Apparently you could question everything, just not Jason Whitlock. How petty. Be a man. Be a man. By the way, I say that as somebody who blocks all kinds of people. I have no problem blocking people because I'm not going to waste my time with trolls and with what are often bots. I see, Megan Basham. I've teased her a bit about this. She will argue with a wall. I mean, she will absolutely argue with a wall. My gosh, she must wear her husband out. I could just only imagine sitting there with her, looking at paint swatches, trying to decide the color of the cabinets. And I can only imagine how that plays out in the lives of the Bashams. But I have said to her in past, Megan, I think you're arguing with bots, at least occasionally. And by the way, I like Megan Basham. I want to be clear when I say that. And Megan, we wish you very well in your recovery. Megan was diagnosed with cancer of a very serious nature, and she has been undergoing treatment for that. And I can enjoy, some of the people she mixes it up with who are just absolute assholes. But occasionally, I want to say, Megan, put your fist back up, put them away, because this is a bot. This is a troll. Don't bother with this person. You're just simply wasting your time. So I have no problem blocking people of that kind. But I mean, Jason, really, I'm your peer. I'm your peer. And furthermore, I'm a peer who was I have some knowledge on this topic. You're talking vaccines where I have no knowledge whatsoever. You're talking about something I know something about. And I was trying to engage you thoughtfully, both off the platform or on it. Either or. I would have been happy either way, if you wanted it to be private or you wanted it to be public. But you can question everything. You just can't question Jason Whitlock. And I did it, by the way, respectfully. So, Jason, happy to have you on the show. And you can tell me why the question everything mantra is so intellectually sophisticated. And by the way, these are people who pretend that it is intellectually sophisticated. It's exactly the opposite. It's infantile. It means that you are a child in faith, a child in knowledge, a child in understanding. It means, as Scripture says, that you're unstable in all your ways. Because you study, and cannot arrive at answers. You cannot arrive at the truth. But anyway, immediately unfollowed me. Okay, I'll live. But I do want to say, I like Jason. I've had Jason on this show. He's very kindly has had me on his show. Love to do it again. But only if I'm allowed to question you, Jason. Only if I'm allowed to have meaningful dialogue with you, not just to be a troll, but to have thoughtful discussion. I say the same for Tucker Carlson. Now, this stuff matters, and you may wonder, why does this matter? Well, first of all, let's just take Jason as an example. You can't call yourself a conservative and a Christian, and Jason calls himself both, without accepting certain propositions to be true. There are certain things you cannot question and call yourself those two things. There are certain propositions you must accept to be true if you're going to make those claims, and you do. Second, the great irony of the question everything philosophy is it's the left's ultimate triumph. Marx is cheering you on from his grave north of London. He's cheering you on because this is exactly the leftist strategy. Question everything. How do you think statues got toppled? We should question whether or not those guys on Mount Rushmore are really the good guys. They may be the villains. How do you think men ended up in women's bathrooms and sports? By questioning, what is a woman? What is a man? As though they were sort of philosophical rather than biological facts. How do you think we arrived at a place like that? Why do you think that there are so many kids, and by the way, I just met a ton of them in Europe. Why do you think there are so many kids who are out in the streets throwing rocks and burning shit and everything else? Why do you think that they're doing it? Because they've been taught to question everything and to arrive at no answers. You see, the question everything philosophy is meant to undermine your worldview. It's meant to leave you somewhat shaken about facts that you had previously accepted, but now you're left wondering. It's Satan slithering into the garden and saying, did he actually say, you shall not eat of that tree in the garden? Satan's approach with Eve was to say, I'm just asking questions. Question everything, Eve. These people all hide behind the I'm just asking questions approach. Hey, I'm innocent here. All I did, I'm just asking questions. Those kinds of people, it's an effort, it's a psyop to undermine your worldview and to leave you at a place where you're questioning your very existence. You know, I think it's so interesting. Last year, Tim Pool of Timcast, his producer, kindly reached out to me. I've mentioned this on a previous episode. Reached out to me and asked me if I would be willing to come to their studio, which I think is in West Virginia. They were going to fly me up and house me and wanted me to come on their show for, I don't know, I think it's like a 3-hour podcast, and to discuss the question, are we living in a simulation? I try to stay in my lane. I try very hard to stay in my lane, to know what my expertise is and isn't. The temptation in my world is to comment on everything because you begin to feel like you are an authority on everything. But so far, I've generally resisted that temptation. And my response was to say I was very flattered. I really appreciate the invitation. And I can think of 1,000 questions I'd love to discuss on your show, but that's not one of them. And I think you're going to be disappointed with me because you're going to begin the show by saying, so Larry, are we living in a simulation? I'm going to say, no. Podcast over. Interview over. I have nothing else to add to that. Now I'm starting to feel like I have something to say on that question. Because these are people who are treating life like the whole thing is a simulation. And by the way, the crowd that believes it's a simulation, they tend to be gamers. These are the questions gamers are asking, the kind of people who swatted me. They're people who have had the Tucker Carlsons and Candace Owens of the world as their teachers, who rather than shoring them up intellectually and morally, set them out into the world questioning absolutely everything. And people like that throw rocks and they burn shit. That's what they do. That's what they do. And they go into the opposite bathrooms and they play on the opposite sports teams. And they're the kind of people who are extremely dangerous. You need to understand that this is a psyop. This is a psyop. And again, if you think that I'm saying this because it helps my brand, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. These are people with much larger platforms than mine and who will never have me on their show. But I feel that I have to be consistent. If I'm going to call out the left, I have to call out the right. And by the way, sometimes calling out people on your own side matters more. And it's because I'm not worried that fans of this show, at least most of them, are going to generally believe the things that Richard Dawkins says. I'm not too worried about that. I'm not too worried that they're going to follow and believe everything that, say, Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or Joe Biden says. They know better. I am worried, however, that they're going to believe everything that Jordan Peterson says. And Peterson says a lot of things that are good, but he says a number of things that will lead you straight to hell because he does not understand salvation. And by the way, I should do a short on this, just a little video short. Trump, this past week, Trump was on Fox News. And did you see this? Trump said, I'm sorry, this is a rabbit hole. I'm going in another direction here, but I did want to make some commentary on it. Trump said that he was hoping to bring the war between Ukraine and Russia to an end because he wants to go to heaven. He said he wants to go to heaven. And he said, a lot of people say that I'm at the bottom of the totem pole and I'm not doing very well. But if I'm able to bring this war to an end, maybe it gets me in. Those comments, they're such sweet comments. They moved me and they saddened me because they confirmed what I've said on this show for a very long time, that Donald Trump isn't a Christian. And it's ironic because Donald Trump, like Xerxes, he's like a Xerxes, he has come to the defense of Christians. He's been a champion for Christians, champion for the unborn, even though he's not a strong pro-lifer. Meaning, I believe God has used him mightily. But he doesn't understand salvation. And why those comments moved me in particular is because it's the kind of thing I heard come out of my father's mouth a million times. As smart a man as my father was, and he was very clever, the spiritual truth that you can't earn your salvation, you would say to him that you can't earn your salvation, and he would come right back with something that suggested that you could. And it was clear that my dad believed that he had suffered and done so much for his country, and he had, that he thought that ought to count for something with God. Well, it does count for something with God, but it doesn't get you into heaven. Repentance and acknowledgement that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, it's the only way that's going to get you in. And I sure wish that Donald Trump has somebody other than Paula White advising him on these questions and just trying to get close to him because they want proximity to power. I hope there's someone in his proximity who knows the truth of what I've just said and who has the compassion and concern and the opportunity that they don't miss to articulate that to Donald Trump. I really pray for that. My daughter and I were driving along yesterday, and she mentioned it to me, and I said, you know what? Let's just pray right now. And we did, as we were driving. I didn't close my eyes. I didn't veer across the median and slam into a bunch of cars. But we did pray for Donald Trump, thinking about that. And anyway, again, that's a rabbit hole, but I did want to mention that. Let me close with this. One other thing that I wish to say this past week, I've been off of social media for the entire month of August. Things that you see that are being posted there are being posted by staff. And that is because I've been traveling. I'm very busy with a couple of projects, and I'm also reevaluating social media. Is it a necessary evil? Is it something I just have to do to get my content out because I kind of hate it? Or is it something I do because I get some kind of dopamine hit, off of that? I want to have a proper approach in view of social media. I also want to be reading a lot more than I am. And it's easy to just take your phone and you just, what do they call it? Like dead scroll or something like that. You just scroll, and you're just looking at stuff for hours that's really kind of meaningless. And so I've been off and I've been seeing some very good things come out of that for me personally, because it just means, I've knocked out 3 books in just that period of time just because of that. And I was in Germany and doing an awful lot of reading and research there. But I almost came back to social media for this reason. Dr. James Dobson died last week. There's been an awful lot of talk about John MacArthur's death. And John MacArthur was a lion for the faith. In my opinion, James Dobson's influence dwarfed MacArthur's. And it's because James Dobson has been, and by the way, that sounds like I'm saying something ill about John MacArthur. I don't mean it that way, not at all. John MacArthur will wear a very large crown in heaven, I'm sure bigger than me. But James Dobson, the point that I would make about Dobson is that Dobson, who was a psychologist, he had a position at USC School of Medicine, and he leveraged his common sense approach to family issues with a down-to-earth manner and a keen intellect to speak into the culture, and not just the Christian culture. He was reaching unbelievers. His book, Dare to Discipline, was a massive bestseller, and it wasn't just Christians who were buying it. And it was an answer to Dr. Spock's disastrous approach to child rearing and discipline. His was an answer to that. And when Lori, my wife, was pregnant with our first child, Michael, I read that book, and I can still remember passages of that book that were, it was fantastic. And then I read his book, Bringing Up Boys. Lori and I have 3 boys in addition to Sasha. I should have brought Sasha down here, actually. Sasha's visiting, and she's here at the studio, and I should have brought her down and brought her onto the show briefly. But anyway, and his books on fatherhood, his books, he's had numerous books that I have found extremely helpful. But people don't use this word when they talk about Dobson, and I will. James Dobson was arguably one of the most effective American apologists of the second half of the 20th century. He was an apologist. I mean, he was a defender of the faith. You don't think of him as that way because you think more in terms of his, his educational background and, his position as a psychologist. But James Dobson was absolutely an apologist, and his radio show was fantastic. I listened to that radio show for years, and for reasons that I do not understand, he's more or less been sort of sidelined and forgotten by evangelicals in the last 15 or 20 years. And it's rather coincidental that 2 days before he died, I was telling my wife, I would sure love to get James Dobson on the show. He is a hero of mine. He is a hero of mine. If Elon Musk were sitting at a table in a restaurant and James Dobson, I wouldn't care to go over to talk to Elon Musk, but I would want to go and talk to James Dobson. That's how much I respected James Dobson and for his voice in the culture. And the Reagan administration, made good use of him. He was on the Mies Commission for pornography, and the things that he had to say coming out of that were absolutely shocking. If you were thinking that pornography meant, Playboy pinups or something, he came out and started talking about things that many people never heard of before. I certainly hadn't, with snuff films and things of this nature. He was talking about the abuse and trafficking of children, scarring things. And here was a guy who became increasingly political, and this is why the organization that he founded, Focus on the Family, eventually wanted to part ways with him. It was because he started speaking into political issues. The older he got, the more he became like an Old Testament prophet. And I mean that in a complimentary way, because Dobson had become so alarmed by the things that were happening in the culture, he had decided, I can't remain silent on this anymore. I will not remain silent on this. I will speak to these things. And I had a nice little chat with his son, who has a radio show, who he invited me on his show some years ago. And I should have asked him, hey, can I get your dad's number? I'd love to have him on my show sometime. But anyway, James Dobson, we have heaven's gain is our loss. And I think it's just unfortunate that for us that he's moved on, but how wonderful for him. But we pray for his wife and his family. This has been another episode of Ideas Have Consequences. And ladies and gentlemen, don't question everything. I sure hope you've arrived at a place in your life where there are a few things that you are certain about. God's love, his existence, and your purpose, your mission in this life at the bare minimum. See you next week.